Good evening, and welcome to Tales and Cocktails. It is Wednesday, it is 6:30, it's 6 o'clock, excuse me, so it is time. And tonight on Earth, again, that trying to connect message. Oh, Spectrum, for heaven's sake, get your act together. Tonight's tale is by Clive James. That really threw me. Sorry about that. Now, Clive James was a writer and broadcaster from Australia. He was a poet and television critic, and he died at age 89 from a long illness. And this is, to me, a delightful tale. So I hope you will enjoy it, my dears. Okay, it's entitled Billycart Racing by Clive James. None of this meant that I was a good practical hand. For example, I could not build billy carts very well. Other children, most of them admittedly older than I, but some of them infuriatingly not, constructed billy carts of advanced design with skeleton hardwood frames and steel-jacketed ball race wheels that screamed on the concrete wood paths like a diving stuka. The box mounted on a fence paling spine frame with drearily silent rubber wheels taken off an old pram. In such a creation, I could go at a reasonable clip down our street and twice as fast down Sunbeam Avenue, which was much steeper at the top. But even going down Sunbeam, my billy cart was no great thrill compared with the ball race models, which, having a ground clearance of about half an inch and being almost frictionless, were able to attain tremendous velocities at low profile, so that to the onlooker, their riders seemed to be traveling downhill, sitting magically just above the ground, while to the riders themselves, the sense of speed was breathtaking. After school and at weekends, boys came from all over the district to race on the Sunbeam Avenue footpaths. There would be 20 or 30 carts. The noise was indescribable. It sounded like the Battle of Britain going on in somebody's bathroom. There would be about a half an hour racing before the police came. Residents often took the law into their own hands, hosing the grim-faced riders as they went shrieking by Sunbeam Avenue. Sunbeam Avenue ran parallel to Margaret Street. Carts racing down the footpath on the far side had a straight run of about a quarter of a mile all the way to the park. Emitting shock waves of sound, the ball race carts would attain such speeds that it was impossible for the rider to get off. All he could do was to crash reasonably gently when he got to the end. Carts racing down the footpath on the near side could go only half as far, although very nearly as fast, before being faced with a right-angle turn into Irene Street. Here, a pram-wheeled cart, like mine, could demonstrate its sole advantage. The traction of the rubber tires made it possible to negotiate the corner, and developed a histrionic lean-over of the body and slide of the back wheels, which got me around the corner unscathed, leaving black, smoking trails of burnt rubber. Mastery of this trick saved me from being relegated to the ranks of the little kids, than which there was no worse fate. I had come to depend on being thought of as a big kid. Luckily, only the outstanding ball race drivers could match my Irene Street. Others slid straight on with a yelp of metal and a shower of sparks, braining themselves on the asphalt road. One driver scalped himself under a bread ban. The Irene Street corner was made doubly perilous by Mrs. Brantwaite's poppies. Mrs. Branthwaite inhabited the house on the corner. She was a known witch whom we often persecuted after dark by throwing gravel on her roof. It was widely believed that she poisoned cats. Certainly she was a great ringer. In retrospect, I can see that she could hardly be blamed for this, but her behavior seemed at the time like irrational hatred of children. She was a renowned gardener. Her front yard was like the cover of a seed catalog. Extending her empire, she had flower beds even in her 2 front strips, one on the Sunbeam Avenue side and the other on the Irene Street side, i.e., on both outside edges of the famous corner. The flower beds held the area's best collection of poppies. She had been known to phone the police if he looked. At the time I am talking about, Mrs. Branthwaite's poppies were in full bloom, all of them. It was essential to make the turn without hurting a single hair of a poppy's head. Otherwise, the old lady would probably drop the telephone and come out shooting. Usually, when the poppies were in bloom, nobody dared make the turn. I did. Not out of courage, but because in my ponderous cart, there was no real danger of going wrong. The daredevil leanings over and the dramatic skids were just icing on the cake. But got ambitious. One Saturday afternoon, when there was a particularly large turnout, I got sick of watching the ball race carts howling to glory down the far side. I organized the slower carts, like my own, into a train. Every cart except mine was deprived of its front axle and loosely bolted to the cart in front. The whole assembly was a box cart at the back. The back cart I dubbed the chuck wagon, using terminology I'd picked up from the Hopalong Cassidy serial at the pictures. I was the only one alone in his cart. Behind me there were 2 or even 3 to every cart until you got to the chuck wagon, which was crammed full of little kids, some of them so small they were holding toy koalas and sucking dummies. From its very first run down the far side, my supercart was a triumph. Even the adults who had been hosing us called their families out to marvel as we went streaming by. On the supercar Maya, since even the top-flight ball race riders had demanded to have their vehicles built into it, thereby heightening its tone, swelling its passenger list, and multiplying its already impressive output of decibels. Once again, I should have left well alone. The thing was already famous. It had everything but a dining car. Why did I ever suggest that we should transfer it to the near side and try the Irene Street turn? With so much inertia, the supercart started slowly, but it accelerated like a bull. Long before we reached the turn, I realized that there had been a serious miscalculation. The miscalculation was all mine, of course. Sir Isaac Newton would have got it right. It was too late to do anything except pray. Leaning into the turn, I skidded my own cart safely around in the usual way. The next few segments followed me, describing an arc of slightly larger radius than the one in front. First gradually, then with stunning finality, the monster lashed its enormous tail. The air was full of flying ball bearings, bits of wood, big kids, little kids, koalas, and dummies. Most disastrously of all, it was also full of poppy petals. Carter Bloom escaped the scythe. Those of us who could still run scattered to the winds, dragging. The police spent hours visiting all the parents in the district, warning them that the Billycart era was definitely over. It was a police car that took Mrs. Branthwaite away. There was no point waiting for the ambulance. She could walk all right. It was just that she couldn't talk. She stared straight ahead. Her mouth. And that is Billycart Racing by Clive James. I feel so sorry for Mrs. Branthwaite. For any gardener who sees her work destroyed. Anyway, that's it for tonight, my dears. I hope you've enjoyed it. And we will all lift a drink to Mrs. Branthwaite tonight. I certainly will. Good night, my dears. See you in a week. See you next week at 6 o'clock.